What prompted me to finally leave? I had been planning on leaving. I had been planning on leaving for several months because of Brother Young's constant verbal attacks or repeated verbal attacks. But I wanted to fulfill my promises. I really didn't want to leave. I believed what was taught about Acts 2:38. I believed the basic doctrine as what Faith Tabernacle would have considered it. I wasn't comfortable just leaving. I wanted to, quote unquote, stay in the church. I wanted to go to a Oneness Pentecostal church, and I didn't know where else I would go. I knew that other churches in the area weren't going to accept me. I was hoping that maybe I could work it around so that I would time my departure from Faith Tabernacle with a move away from the area. That didn't end up happening. I received word that there was an issue at work. I received the word approximately the same time as the last time that Brother Young blasted me from the pulpit. So my boss came to me and told me that there had been a lawsuit filed and that he needed documentation if I had anything. I had a lot. I had written down, not because I thought that the man would sue us, but because I knew sooner or later that I would be called into question by Edwin Young over my lack of support for this man in his terrible position, having had his legs slammed in the car door, and I wanted to be able to say, this is what this man told me at the time. This is why I couldn't do anything about it. So I had written down some things. I had some things documented that had not happened on work property, that I had been told on church property. My boss asked me for any documentation I had, and I knew I had what it took to win the lawsuit. I also knew that I had been blackmailed. I had been blackmailed when, more than likely, when Edwin stood me up in front of the congregation and yelled at me, or when he yelled at me that day at the church. He had brought my character into question. He was trying to make me doubt myself so that I would do whatever he said, so that I would ask him what to do in that situation when it came up. He knew the paperwork was going to get filed. He had already told me that this man had talked to him, and he didn't need my opinion on it because that man talked to his pastor. I didn't. Again, he was only listening to one side of the story. And again, he had already made up his mind what he wanted to do about it. I went ahead and gave my boss the paperwork that I had and turned in my resignation to the church on the same day. I felt like I had no choice. I knew I couldn't go to Edwin, because if I had gone to Edwin and asked him what to do, I would have been told that I needed to trust my brother. My brother surely had the Holy Ghost. I surely didn't think that my Holy Ghost-filled brother would lie and would believe my Holy Ghost-filled brother over some sinner in the world, would have been Edwin's response. He would have yelled at me. He would have questioned me. He would have questioned my allegiance to the church. But he would not have accepted that I might have a legitimate concern and need godly counsel. That wasn't what he was there for. I couldn't. The only other option that I felt like I had was to refuse to turn in documentation that was required of my job. It was required of my position. I refused to go and hide information from my company that was needed for a legal lawsuit. I refused to bear false witness against my company by either refusing to turn in the information that I had, withholding information that I had about the situation, or by lying and covering for the church to make the church look good, or to make this man look good, to let him win a lawsuit. This wasn't just about one lawsuit. This was about telling the truth or telling lies. I needed to tell the truth. It was time for somebody to stand up and say, this is what's happening in the situation. I knew that if I stayed and I said what I was going to say in that court documentation and what I reported, that I would be thrown out. Rather than waiting for that day to happen, I went ahead and turned in my resignation letter and withdrew my membership that day. I emailed him a resignation letter. I didn't hear anything back from him. He did not advise anybody at the church, not even any office staff, that I had left. I do not know to this day whether he did not receive the letter or whether he received it and then just put it aside and ignored it. I have no idea. I do know that he was never concerned enough to contact me. We were expected to be at church 4 times a week, but he never was concerned enough as my pastor to contact me and ask how I was doing. Nobody from the office staff was directed to call me and ask how I was doing, to make sure that I was okay, to make sure I was well. Nobody ever stopped by my house and asked anything. So my assumption is that probably he got the email and just chose to ignore it, but I don't know that for sure. I don't think I will probably ever know that. I finally notified the office staff myself. I got some strange phone calls after I left. Screaming, crying, wailing. You're going to hell. You've got to get back in the church. You've just got to get back in church. You're going to hell. You know, you're backslid now. I couldn't stomach any more of it. I finally changed my phone number. There's no way to reach people. The only communication I had with the church is, oh my goodness, you're going to hell. No, we're not doing that. That's just, and I knew at that point that I was not going to hell for leaving Faith Tabernacle. Actually, there was a man who preached a message before any of this had happened, 6 months or more before I left. And in it he preached that Jesus is our foundation, not a church, not a man, not a pastor. Jesus is our foundation. And I realized that day that there was nothing that I could do that would change that if I didn't want to change my foundation. My foundation is sure. The things that are built on it are the church, the pastor, and things like that. And those things, they weren't worth much in my life at that point. But I knew my foundation was sure. I knew walking out of that building that day was not walking out on God. No matter how much Edwin compared the two, no matter how much he interchanged the two phrases, he would talk about somebody walking out of church and walking out on God and interchange those two as though they were one and the same. But that church is not my God. That pastor is not my God. My God is Jesus Christ. He's the one that died for me. Not the pastor, not the church. It's God that I serve. I don't need to go to that church to be saved. I can go to any church or no church and be saved. It's not about church. It's about a relationship with Jesus. That's what it's about. That's where my foundation is. And I am sure today that I did the right thing than I was then, and I was sure then that I was doing the right thing. But every day that I have lived since I left has been better, has been more encouraging, more realization that it was right to get out of there. And when this happened, the night that I found out that Edwin Young left, I was shocked and I was thrilled. There was such a relief. Not that he was gone. I hurt for everybody at Faith Tabernacle that he had left behind. I had no idea of the other allegations at the time. All I knew was that the man who had caused so much hurt to me and so many other people was gone. And that he wasn't going to pastor another church and do the same damage someplace else. He had left. all of the accusations that he had made, all of the insinuations against people, all of his words of knowledge saying, oh, I discern that this or that is true of you. It was all gone. I felt such a release that night. I didn't even realize the weight that I was carrying around and the burden of knowing what I had been accused of there, and the things that people had said and the things that they had believed that he had said, until that night when suddenly I didn't have to worry about it anymore. There were no accusations at that point. It was obvious that it wasn't because I had done wrong. I did the right thing by leaving that church, not the wrong thing. And suddenly, people who had not acknowledged that in the past, people who still went to Faith Tabernacle, also believed that what I had done in leaving was right. Whether they would admit it today, 2 months later or not, I don't know. But the fact is, at one point or another, they recognized and they realized, if only momentarily, that it was right to leave.